you shouldn't shy away from conflict. Healthy conflict is great. Unhealthy conflict will destroy and erode an executive team and a company. And you see that when you go meet with founding teams, you can often see an us versus them mentality of like those that were there at the beginning and those that came later. Or folks who came from more product-led companies versus sales-led companies versus services or marketing-led companies. And all of these things are really, it's the dynamic. Most of the time when you're investing in the executive team and the founders, not the product you believe has product market fit or will have product market fit, and there is a large enough TAM and SAM to be successful. But a lot of the time it is the people. And so you look to understand, do these folks have both the intestinal fortitude to do what's necessary to get the company forward, but do they have the intestinal fortitude to do it together? Building companies isn't like golf. It's not an individual sport. It is a team sport. It can get very bloody and it can be very lonely, even though you're on a team, but it's still a team sport. And so it's very much those team dynamics that I think identify whether, these companies will be successful or not.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm super excited to be catching up with Michael Akkerman, who's been in the industry not quite as long as me. As a matter of fact, he just mentioned that my book was one of the first ones he read as he transitioned from organic SEO learnings to paid search. And he's doing a bunch of advising to companies and consulting to companies at the moment. So given the fact that Michael's been there and done that, I wanted to catch up with him and ask him a few questions. So Michael, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kevin. Really excited and great to catch up and see you again today.
So let's start with something that's super topical at the moment, which is the generative AIs are sort of taking over the world, apparently. Not quite at the Terminator level yet, but we do certainly have a lot of conversations around ChatGPT, potentially powering the next generation of Bing. We've also got Bard, which was sort of pre-released by Google within the last couple of days. And, sort of the idea that maybe the search engine results page isn't going to look the same in the future. So I'd love to hear how you think about the evolution of search in the age of AI.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think we're at Skynet yet, but there's definitely potential. And obviously, Bard had a little bit of a hiccup and suddenly slashed quite a lot of Google's share price. But I think, it's really interesting. I think everyone keeps, they're both extremely excited about what this new technology really opens up. And at the same time, cautious and maybe cautiously optimistic, maybe cautiously pessimistic about what it means for the future of search, the future of creatives. When you go beyond search marketing, you start thinking about social or other platforms that are visual in nature, and DALL-E also through OpenAI, like being able to construct images and whatnot. And I think the biggest thing is there the chance for massive change? Yeah. We were discussing this. Do we believe the responses from generative AI yet? Today, like, I've gotten it to write, when it was the World Cup, I got it to write a haiku in French for my French friends when Australia was playing France about why Australia might beat them in this poem. And they were blown away. They commented that the OpenAI spoke better French than they did. And so things where there's a large flexibility on accuracy and a bit more qualitative are fine. But I think as people, search is such an integral aspect of people's lives, and they are searching for answers. Sometimes those answers have really grave consequences if they are wrong. If you think about medical questions, if you think about financial questions. And so I don't know if we're at a place where we are completely ready to turn over the keys. But I think as we think more about kind of the personalization and improving that accuracy through a greater data set, I'm excited to see what Gen AI does within search and within all digital, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all excited and maybe cautiously optimistic. But one of the areas that I think is going to be fascinating to watch is the SEO side, right? Because obviously black hats are immediately jumping on the idea like, oh, this is great because I can just spew out content and actually fairly good content, particularly in French and haiku style. But the content quality is certainly above a mediocre writer in many cases, and sometimes it's actually pretty good. So Google and Bing, who are regularly crawling content, are going to have to be, pretty confident that they're not crawling AI generated content if they're going to rank it well. And then there's the converse question of, well, if it is actually really great content, does it matter if it was created by an AI or a human, or just originally created and then augmented by the human? So the foundation was created by the AI, and then a human went in and fact checked it and improved it and made sure that it truly reflected the task that it was given when it was given to write something. So there are a lot of questions around that as it relates to SEO. And I'm imagining that as we're speaking, probably tens of thousands of pieces of content are being created for the express purposes of SEO. And they've talked about watermarking potentially the content, but if somebody goes in and re-edits the content and improves it, by adding a human layer, the question is, does the watermark remain? And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because it's not only to the point about, hey, how do they know that it came from Gen AI or from a human? Is this piece of content, whether good or bad? But even more so, do the search engines have a responsibility to identify that to the user, to be able to say, hey, these links are Gen AI created content? I think to your point, the watermark, and then is it still is really it's very salient, because to me, it's funny. There are so many use cases here that I see the validity for. Years and years and years ago, when I was still at university, I actually wrote a paper about whether algorithms would ever take the job of DJs, of electronic dance music DJs. And I came to the point where, while they can create music in the future potentially really well, they can't read a crowd. And then just last week, I saw David Guetta, who is within the top 5 DJs in the world. He went and got Gen AI to create a chord series of what a song could sound like in the style of any artist. And he chose Eminem, talking about within EDM. And then he went to another AI platform and put in text, and it generated Eminem's voice. And so he's at this giant rave where he's playing a song that was created by AI that now has vocals by generated AI, and the crowd went nuts. And it's a great song, actually, surprisingly. And so I think that question that you asked is really it's very potent, which is, if it is great content, doesn't matter how it was generated, and potentially it doesn't. But then the next question comes, is there a responsibility to identify that even though it's great content, it was created by a system rather than a person? And I think it's too new to figure out how to police it. I think, you think back to the early days of SEO and keyword stuffing in white text on a white background, and and backlink farms all across the world. Each time, like, there are always nefarious people who will find nefarious things to do. And then, it's up to the good guys and girls and the white hats to try to figure out how to both police it and how to put in guardrails. And I think we're just too early. I think the fact that Bing is now incorporating it, and the biggest AI battle is going via Google and Bing, hopefully they're also thinking about kind of the guardrails they need to put in to keep us all safe from Skynet.
The example you gave of the mashup AI generated Eminem song is fascinating, because it's a more obvious example of the IP licensing implications. Right now, that one's obviously right out there in front. Like, clearly, Eminem could license his voice out to folks who would like to do an Eminem song, either for parody purposes or for performance purposes. And there are constructs that exist, particularly in the music world, for things like that. There's ASCAP, right? So ASCAP was invented when radio stations would start playing music, and the royalties needed to be redistributed to the artists. And there was no sort of central authority that could do that. And they were just using Arbitron ratings and, the amount of money that radio stations were collecting for advertising to properly distribute those royalties back to a centralized entity. In the case of that haiku that you and I discussed earlier, where what sources were used to create that haiku, and what 250 different sources were used on a pro rata basis? Should they all be compensated for the intellectual property that they contributed to this new thing that you got? Especially if this new thing cost you money. Now, maybe it'll be on a subscription basis or whatever, but certainly there are ASCAPian ways of dealing with that, because the ChatGPT knows exactly on a pro rata basis which sources it used to create that. So it could just log that and report back and say, 2/100ths of a cent should go to this place, and 2/100ths of a cent to that place. So no, 5/100ths of a cent should go over here, right? And it will be interesting to see, because I'm sure the lawyers are like sharpening their pencils or their daggers at this point, thinking through the intellectual property implications of ChatGPT and the other AIs.
I think if I remember correctly, I think there is actually already a class action suit against DALL-E, which is the image generator, based upon all of these artists that didn't give common license for their data, but know that DALL-E was going and scraping like get images and Shutterstock and being able to get all of this, these images, which was the basis of the models that actually resulted. And so it's a really interesting, it's a really interesting philosophical business ethics conversation, because especially on creative, so images or video, when you think about art, an artist created art, but often that art has been influenced by all artists prior. And so is there how do you discern whether this is a direct aggregation in sorts of different pieces, or if this is something truly new? Within postmodernism, there is this concept of the death of the author. And so it doesn't matter what the author of the play or the book or the artist actually meant when they created that artifact, that piece of art. All that matters is you as the viewer, what you take in from it.
Yeah.
And so especially in the creative world, it brings a really interesting conversation about how we govern this different entity, because for tens of thousands of years, it has been human ingenuity that has created new things. And now we've built something, we've created something that can create other things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the art behind you, right? And I'm saying to myself, okay, let's say that that artist was influenced by Picasso, right? Does Picasso's family deserve a little bit of a royalty if that
Yeah.
piece of art was purchased? And I think about if I decide to go throw up a canvas and start doing paint splatters on it, and I'm sort of trying to channel Pollock, right? I
Yeah,
think it's his
exactly.
name, right?
Jackson Pollock, do you need to give royalties to the estate?
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a very complex ethical, legal, and business ecosystem that we're about to enter into. And to what extent it's evolutionary versus revolutionary, I think everyone's got their fingers crossed and waiting to see.
Well, exactly. You know, if Terminator is the example, or
Right.
Matrix has taught us anything, we need to go quietly into this. I think what has been really astounding is, you know, there's this concept of the uncanny valley, where like technology, whether it be like a humanoid or an android or whatever, the second they start to act and look too much like us is when it starts getting very uncomfortable for us, because now we're like, wow, we can be replaced. And I think that is where we are right now. We are entering an uncanny valley. And you said right now, most probably in this talk, we're most probably already at 50,000 pieces of content that have been created through Gen AI for SEO purposes. And every single one of those are feeding the model further. So it is like we have these systems which are getting the general corpus of knowledge of humanity continuously fed into it.
Yeah.
Let's hope the revolution goes in our favor.
Yes, absolutely. Switching gears a little bit. One thing that I love about your background is it's been a really interesting mix of strategic and tactical, right? So sometimes you've actually had your hands super dirty down in the marketing trenches, and other times you've been more advisory and sort of helping to come up with strategies. And often marketers and brands and businesses fail in the application of the strategy down into the tactical. So I'd love for you to talk about, like, when it works well, right? The strategy getting translated into the, you know, down to the trenches. What makes it work well, and when it breaks, like, where do you see it breaking?
Yeah, and I've had a front row seat to both. So you know, my favorite quote of all time, and anyone who's worked with me or for me has heard this ad nauseum, and it's a quote by Thomas Edison, which is, "Vision without execution is hallucination." And so I think that, you know, there's a lot of great strategies out there, but unless you're able to put it into practice, it is just an idea. It is a dream. And so for me, I'm an operator at heart. So yes, there is the strategic vision, but then there's also the strategic execution against that. And I think often the places, you know, you ask where it works well and where it doesn't, and I think it sometimes is often very binary. And for me, one is, hey, do you have a strategy that everyone actually knows and everyone agrees upon? So we all know the North Star. We all know where we want to be, what we want to be when we grow up. Everyone is aligned on that. And then, does everyone continue to federate that story within the company? And then step two, great. So now that we know where we want to go, what is the roadmap? And I don't mean that from a product perspective or a marketing perspective, but like, what is the plan on how to get there? And for me, whatever framework you use, whether it be something like OKRs, objectives and key results, MBOs, managed by objectives, it's all the same concept of, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So we know where we need to go. And now, how do we start breaking it into bigger chunks where we can set goals? And again, the biggest, most important thing is for, especially at the executive team, and then continue to do it, everyone feels like they're doing this together. It is a team sport. Strategy is a team sport. Strategy never works when, you know, you I'm sorry if there's a lot of, McKinsey or BCG or Accenture folks. I'm sure they would agree that when strategy is outsourced to them and they come up with it and then it never works. The body rejects the organ. And so it really has to be a collaborative mechanism for everyone to agree and get on the bus and get on the right seats on the bus on where you want to. I speak in a lot of like euphemisms, quotes, because my teams call them ACK-isms because of my last name. But ultimately it's about unification. And then the execution, like, it's great. Things will change. Your strategy doesn't necessarily, like, hopefully you've done enough planning, enough due diligence to understand that this is the right place to go. If you need to pivot, fine. But it really should be the levels below, not the what, or definitely not the why, but the how. The how can change left, right, and center. And so I think where it often breaks down is on that how. Everyone has opinions. Lots of people don't like sharing their Legos. Lots of people don't like, the cheese being moved, all of those management euphemisms. And it's really, I think, where strategy often breaks down to execution, ends up being cultural. So are people open and receptive to change? Are people stuck in their silos of their organization, a fiefdom, and they don't actually collaborate cross-functionally to bring this thing together? Are people just saying yes as a talking head, as lip service, but not really leaning in to drive forward? And it's ultimately the responsibility of leadership to be that unifying group. So I worked with someone, he used to say this line, and I really liked it, where, when the leadership team was in the room debating strategy, debating what we needed to do, we could be divided when we were together. But the second we left and went to our respective teams, we were united apart. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's where it continuously breaks down. The strategy isn't necessarily wrong. It's everyone buying into the strategy. It's everyone understanding their part of that strategy and how to execute. And then everyone feeling all the way down to the bottom that what they're doing is impacting this business objective. No one wants to come to work every day and just feel like they are Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill, but not actually driving impact for the company. And so, there's a lot of stats, especially in this world where, we're little 16:9 boxes and we haven't all returned to the office. I think executives are really doing themselves and their company a disadvantage by not continuously reiterating what their mission is, what their vision is, what is the strategy, what are the objectives and key results they're driving towards. And even when you think everyone's heard it and they're tired of hearing it ad nauseum, that's only when it starts to work. Like, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer here. And there have been lots of studies that, especially now with everyone remote, continuously pushing that clarity is what drives culture and what drives productivity towards the execution of that strategy.
That's an excellent point. A bunch of excellent points, actually. One thing that I encounter probably more often than I'd prefer is this sort of obsession with reports and analytics. Often those reports and analytics are actually wrong, and even if they're right, and you're trying to sort of navigate using those reports, it's like trying to drive down the road using the rearview mirror. It's what happened in the past. So it's very hard to drive a car looking in the rearview mirror. Can you sort of see whether there's a curve behind you? Yes. Can you see the curve in front of you or the cliff in front of you? No. So we sort of got those two elements of like the false sense of security that analytics provides, and whether it's Google Analytics or other analytics. And then sort of the idea that, how marketers should reconcile analytics against their vision and their objectives and their goals.
Yeah, I think that's a salient point. Data or analytics is very easily biased and can often be wrong. 90% of people know that as a fact. And there's an example. So I think the way you phrased it, it's backwards looking. It should be used as a signal, but it shouldn't be the only signal. And I think often you said it's a false sense of security where people are looking at the data, and the data is saying, well, everything's fine, but it's not being able to forecast the earthquake that's coming, or COVID, or Gen AI, or all of these real seismic changes. I remember I was working with a company as an advisor, and they forecasted potential consumer behavior in the future. And I was like, great, how accurate is it? And they were like, oh, it's 95% accurate. Unless there is a climate disaster or an economic downturn, or some of the data sets get invalidated. And I was like, oh, okay, so it's 50-50 is what you're saying. Like, all of these caveats mean that it isn't perfect. And I think that's really the point, like where continuously marketers can think about, in the Wayne Gretzky, like where the puck is going, using all of the information so they don't repeat the problems of the past, but how they can get much more forward-looking, and how they can also get more real-time signals, how they can go and talk more to their customers, how they can have their customers challenge them about what they want to see in the future, how they want to be spoken to and marketed to in the future, I think is also a really important thing. Like, as third-party cookies are going away, and IDFA changes and privacy legislation coming through, I think marketers have this wonderful opportunity to redesign the mediums of conversation that they want to have with their existing customers and their potential customers. And there are many methods to which they can really implement that. And I think this is a unique time to do it. And it's also why you see a lot of marketers really driving towards more first parties, why you see a lot of publishers turning into walled gardens as well, because suddenly they're able to, for a multitude of reasons, but control this conversation with their consumer.
Those are all really interesting points. I particularly like the idea of the Wayne Gretzky quote about where the puck is going, because obviously opportunity cost is the hardest thing to measure and predict. Like, what if you had done something different? How would the future be different? And you wear a hat sometimes as a venture scout, like for a venture capital company, which of course VC firms are all about identifying opportunity and identifying the costs of not taking an opportunity. So wearing that hat, sort of, what mistakes do you see management teams making, with regards to either identifying opportunity cost, quantifying opportunity cost, having a handle on that, and how where is room for improvement in that area?
Yeah, it's great. So I think I've seen very well functioning executive leadership teams, and those that could do a little sanding around the edges, is the nicest way I'm going to say. And I think a lot of that, again, comes down to this alignment. Most of the people, most people get to be the best in their field or their career and whatnot, and it's never easy. It doesn't mean you need to be mean. Like, I don't think I'm going to use the nice term for it. So I don't think mean people get very far, because at some stage it comes crashing down. But I do think that most executives have a little bit of silverback gorilla in them, and that is how they got to be the best and into that role in the first place. But what happens when you get a whole bunch of silverback gorillas into a room together? Like, there's going to be fights. And so I really do think that where teams break down is misalignment on why they're all there. And I look to CEOs and founders to be the unifier, not the divider. And so I think a lot of what I see is a lot of founders want to, placate the individuals on their team, so they tell them what they want to hear, and often it's in conflict with one another. I think that as CEOs or founders are assembling a team, obviously you want complementary experiences. You want to find people who can work together harmoniously. Often people who, I believe in diversity, very much so. So whether that be gender or religion or self-affiliation of race or anything like that, I believe that you get a diverse amount of people in a room, and they will solve any problem with diverse solutions. And I really think that is valuable. But with that being said, you shouldn't shy away from conflict. Healthy conflict is great. Unhealthy conflict will destroy and erode an executive team and a company. And you see that when you go meet with founding teams, and you can often see an us versus them mentality of like those that were there at the beginning and those that came later, or folks who came from more product-led companies versus sales-led companies versus services or marketing-led companies. And all of these things are really, it's the dynamic. Most of the time when you're investing in the executive team and the founders, not the product you believe has product market fit or will have product market fit, and there is a large enough TAM and SAM to be successful. But a lot of the time it is the people. And so you look to understand, do these folks have both the intestinal fortitude to do what's necessary to get the company forward, but do they have the intestinal fortitude to do it together? Building companies isn't like golf. It's not an individual sport. It is a team sport. It can get very bloody and it can be very lonely, even though you're on a team, but it's still a team sport. And so it's very much those team dynamics that I think identify whether, these companies will be successful or not. And so to phrase it differently, your question, I think being able to show that everyone is on the same page, everyone is extremely aligned in both where the company is going and their role that they need to play in doing that. That is what is the hallmark of an early successful company.
Those are all things to live by that executive teams should think through, right? Because it's a lot harder to get things accomplished if things are not harmonious, but with sort of a healthy tension, right? So I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that we're both fans of Professor Scott Galloway, right? I haven't been taken any of his courses. I think perhaps you have. So I'd love to sort of have you distill out what your favorite sort of learnings have been from his courses, because he's just a fountain, a wealth of knowledge, and a fountain of great advice in his blog and in his tweets and his other information source. So I can only imagine what his courses must be, how rich and diverse they must be.
Yeah, he so I've taken Professor Galloway was obviously at NYU Stern. As a professor, he had a company called G2, which was a insights and consulting company that he ended up selling, I want to say, to Nielsen, but I could be wrong there. And I don't think he's at NYU anymore, but he has moved completely into his own kind of teaching business. And part of that is putting together these sprints across different topics that are affecting. And I think nearly all companies today are marketing or product companies, and a lot of it focuses around that. And so I've done 2 of those sprints, which were multi-week, multiple sessions where you're analyzing and diagnosing different companies that have both been successful and not, and why they've been successful and not. And so these sprints are both done, a strategy sprint, a brand sprint, etc. And I think what I was very impressed about was really the frameworks he gives to think about companies and why they're successful, not just what their business model is or what their product is, but what are the actual elements that have made them so successful, and then comparing them to, you know, other specific companies in the same space. And so, you know, he has concepts obviously about, you know, their maintaining growth and their margins. Obviously, is it a place, you know, Google for a long time, same as, you know, IBM used to be, was seen as a career accelerant.
Right.
And so, you know, they got great talent because they were a place that saw that you could go. But there were two that I really liked, apart from like visionary storytelling, etc., was this concept of both a Benjamin Button company and a Rundle. Okay, so both of these specifically, like the Benjamin Button company is a company that gets stronger and stronger. So if you think of any marketplace, any walled garden, anyone that has a large data set that is often driving personalization or recommendations, it is that it starts off like in Benjamin Button, really old and clunky and not successful because it doesn't have the data set to be able to drive forward. And then as it gets more users and potentially more whatever the demand or supply equivalent is, the marketplace gets better and better, and personalization gets better, and it starts getting younger and younger. So it's effectively, it starts off really bad and gets really solid, the same way as Benjamin Button started off in the book and the movie, was born an old man baby thing, and then grew younger and younger. And then this concept of a Rundle, which is really like being able to bundle numerous different elements within the same company. So if you think about any company that has a stack, a Salesforce, an Amazon, a Google, you know, so both within the software as a service or consumer internet, being able to kind of bring these things together as this bundling of, hey, you can have this, you can have the core and this and this and this and this. And when you look at companies, I think the ones that successfully identify what business they're in and what are the key drivers between them and the market and their competitors is what's going to, it's what allows them to know what strategy they want to pursue.
Yeah,
so I know there was a lot.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, the Rundle may become really apropos to the whole AI ChatGPT side of things, right? Because if the ad-supported models look different in the future because less people rely on the SERP, a lot of people will still want to select from a SERP. But as more people are sort of given the answer by some kind of an AI, there may be a sort of Prime style payment that users have to subscribe to it if you want to get this level of information. And when you sort of look at the billing footprints that these organizations already have and the extent to which there's an obvious sort of Rundle upcharge, right? There's not that many people that have the billing relationships. Microsoft and Google definitely are, right? I mean, but Microsoft, I think, has probably a stronger billing footprint at both the business and consumer level, in particular the business, where the value is probably considerably higher to AI augmentation. And so when you think about how many people have Office 365, et cetera, and the ability for them to Rundle something into that, in comparison to the number of folks who pay for, you know, Google's business suite, right? It's a lower number, right? And although a lot of people have Google Pay, so they do have a billing relationship with Google, but they're not already buying something from Google necessarily, right? So it's perhaps a little bit more of a stretch because it's not a Rundle. It's like the first time you might pay Google is for augmented search, for BART or whatever, you know, whatever they're calling it.
Bundle. Yeah, what so, you know, I'd love to pose the same question to you. Like, what, when you think about you know, Scott's strategic advice, and what stands out to you as the thing that like you keep and you federate to your fans?
The you know, Scott has this amazing ability to simultaneously entertain and educate, and that's really tough. There are not a lot of folks who can pull that off. And he's one of the folks who sort of inspire me to try to figure out how to do that to some extent. I think for me, like the takeaway is less sort of any particular pearls of wisdom, and it's more the fact that if you can find a way to make the information you're trying to convey engaging and interesting, that it's more likely to break through the clutter, right? And so that's sort of if I sort of were to distill his essence out, that's sort of one of the things that really, that plus obviously, the great intellect on top of it, those two things together, I think just make for a really rare combination.
Well, it's funny. So I often say, like, I'm a visual learner. And so if you ever work with me, and I love an infographic, I love visuals, I love a graph. I don't like just text. If I present to you in a slide, generally there'll be no text. It'll just be big images. And I think what Scott does really well is finds the visual articulation of his points, whether he's talking about the fact that young guys these days don't have friends, or that
I read that blog post.
Yeah, exactly. That the economy,
it was a dystopian blog post about the future of humanity.
Exactly.
that revolves around.
Sometimes he gets bit esoteric, but I think his points, he has a really great team that is able to convey that data in a really nice visual way. He is very elegant in how he writes, but I often find that the visuals are what kind of hits home the most for me, and he finds a way to convey that data in a both engaging and hilarious way.
Absolutely.
Just a hint of sarcasm.
Well, 2023 is off to a bit of a surprise start with reductions in force all over the place, and questions as to the macroeconomic future, as well as industry trend differences. But a lot of uncertainty. But despite the uncertainty, what has you excited about 2023?
So there is uncertainty. I think there's also just a lot of negative news cycles. Like, obviously there have been reductions in force and layoffs, and people have lost their jobs, and that's terrible. 100% that is terrible. But there's so much talk about a recession, and yet the place where I don't see a recession is in the actual data. Both on the strength of unemployment numbers and the lowering of inflation. And I think I speak about this often. Like, I generally am a glass half full kind of guy, and looking at all this data and just leveraging the Phillips curve, which is now 60 plus years old, about how inflation and unemployment are inversely correlated, and the yield curve is inversed, and blah blah, all these things. I'm like, maybe they just don't work anymore. Like, maybe with 8 billion people and differing mechanisms within the economy, maybe we should think about different things. We have AI that can now create stuff out of thin air. Maybe there are better economic models that we can employ. And so while there's uncertainty, I am very hopeful that 2023 actually will be a macroeconomic good. And for all of this kind of tumultuous times and unfortunately people losing their jobs, I think it will spur on more innovation than we have seen in a long time. I think a lot of people, it's always tough, but we'll wake up and say, great, now I want to go do something different. And all of these wonderful skills that have been accrued in traditional digital technology or marketing will start to federate and permeate into either traditional companies looking for a transformation and looking for their 2.0, or into smaller startups that potentially didn't have people who had seen the movie before and could help drive them to scale. And so I really think there is going to be an unprecedented amount of innovation and growth that is going to come from 2023 and beyond. I am excited about Gen AI to be more than just a toy. I think there are some really great use cases and applications that people are leveraging it for right now, but it still feels very novel, as opposed to giving, I had one in my browser called Compose AI, which would try to figure out the remainder of anything I was typing. I think there are bigger and better applications for it. Within, I really like blockchain and smart contract, not crypto necessarily, Web3. And I think the more use cases we can figure out for that underlying technology, especially within marketing, I think there is a very big proposition for smart contracts and tokenization to be really powerful within marketing and loyalty and rewards. And I'm looking to 2023 to be able to see that come a bit more into fruition. And then I would love to have a positive news cycle. That's
In
my
general.
like hopeful. Yeah, I signed up to a newsletter which is literally just good things, because everywhere, I get it. As humans, we seek out negative news because when we lived in caves, we needed to know if we could trust that person, or if there was a crocodile outside, or an alligator for those in this hemisphere. And I get it. And so we seek out negative news. And so publications pump out more negative news. And I think somewhere we just need to bring the temperature down and all kind of figure out, hey, where can we go together with all of the goodness underlying in the foundation?
Absolutely. Well, it was great catching up, Michael, and I look forward to 2023 as well. I've got a bunch of things cooking under each of my hats. So it's definitely a year where I feel like I'll sleep next year, which is fun. Thanks again.
Thank you so much
Great
for
catching
having
up.
me. Yeah, this was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me, and hope to speak to you soon.
Likewise.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.